It's finally time. It's been quite a journey, but it's finally time to take this series home. It took a while to get here, and by the time this video goes out, I have graduated from college. So for those of you who have stuck with me for this long, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed the video. The decline of BioWare started as a slow descent, but the changes came drastically with each new game that would come out. Sometimes it wasn't noticeable, and sometimes it was seen as a clumsy mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. As we talked about before, Dragon Age 2 was a clear downgrade, not just compared to Origins, but also to other titles that BioWare is known for. And it's not surprising to see why that came to be. Too many ambitious ideas to pack in, and not enough time to develop them all. And in retrospect, they chose the wrong game to try to implement their ideas on, and thus, Dragon Age 2 fell flat, and the fans were disappointed. However, not all hope was lost. They still had Mass Effect 3 coming out, the long-awaited conclusion to the now beloved sci-fi universe. Surely that would go well, right? Yeah, so Mass Effect 3 was pretty fucking rough. The gameplay was solid, and some even consider it the best combat in the series, but the story took a complete nosedive in quality. It was clear that the budget was cut on a lot of concepts and ideas that would never get fully fleshed out. Some did, but not all of them. And it had probably the most controversial story, only to be topped by Last of Us Part 2. The ending of this game made fans lash out beyond belief, and caused the developers to be involved in both hilarious and horrifying stories. BioWare found themselves in a complete shit show of a situation in 2012, so they thought it would be best if they retreated back and stayed silent for a little while, until it was time to come out again. It wasn't an easy position that BioWare was in. Even before Mass Effect 3 was released, there were a ton of employees leaving the company. Veterans were gone, and we were left with a lot of new blood to take the reins. As the year of 2013 went by, they worked on a new title to expand their fantasy series. Dragon Age returned on the Frostbite engine with the promise to rekindle what was lost in Dragon Age 2. Or so they thought. On first glance, it seems as though that Inquisition wants to return to its roots. You have the option to choose between 4 races, with Kunari being the new playable one. And you have the option right from the start on what your class and combat speciality will be, as opposed to speccing into it as you play the game. I don't really know if this has a big difference, but it's a neat little change. So this game starts 2 years after Dragon Age 2. The fighting between the mages and the Templars have only gotten worse, and a meeting between them is being held to hash out terms and come to some sort of peace between the two groups. But already, it's clear that they're trying to improve from 2, because as opposed to being restricted to a human, you now have the option to more races, much like Dragon Age Origins. And hell, there's even one more race to choose from. So we're off to a good start. This is what you see on the title screen. So they are taking into account the previous game's plot, and the escalation of this conflict throughout the series will now be the main focus of this game. Or at least, that's what I thought. But then suddenly, an explosion happens, and this is where your character comes in. Somehow, your character was in the center of this massive explosion, and ended up killing a bunch of mages and Templars. And to make matters worse, there's now a giant Nurgle cloud leaking demons in. The guards come in and find the only person still breathing, and throw you into a dungeon. Off to a great start. So then Mommy Cassandra comes in with Leliana, and they ask you why the fuck you survived, and you respond with, "I don't fucking know, man, I just wanted to raise a canes and ended up here." And then you look at your hand and you see you have a green glowy plot device. So Cassandra sets you free and sees if you can close the breach. But she doesn't trust you, so you keep the cuffs on, until the bridge falls and you have to fight off some demons, which introduces combat, which we'll get to that soon. But after a while, you meet up with your old pal Varric and a new character, Egghead Solus. And he shows you that you now have the power to stop breaches. You don't know how, why, or when, but you have this power now. So, just from the beginning alone, we can see that they did listen to the backlash of Dragon Age 2, and they try to replicate Origins. And from first glance, they are achieving it, with the main character being more of a blank slate and the main plot has an overarching theme. Unfortunately, they don't commit to it enough, and it creates this mishmash of styles that don't really mix well. Your character is a blank slate, but they still have a voice. You have a variety of races to choose from, but it's very rarely elaborated on where you came from. And the story goes right to the main plot as opposed to setting up your character's origins and easing them into the world. And these add up as you continue to play the game. They want to have it both ways. They want you to start a new adventure with a new character, but they also want to continue the storyline from the previous games. And it just doesn't work that way. It brings back characters and plot points from previous installments to keep it connected, but it ultimately fails to commit to them in the long run. The biggest problem is that each game has a new protagonist, so a new character has to continue on the story that was preceded by someone else. So we have to simultaneously be introduced to the new cast of characters while also being reintroduced to the characters that we already know. Moving on, something you will very quickly notice in this game is that it's open world.
I just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
If I had a nickel for every middling game that was a continuation of a series that went open world and somehow won Game of the Year, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Now, it's not that I have a problem with open world games. It's just that open world games have become such an oversaturated market that a lot of people have gotten tired of. And there are times where developers tend to use the open world as a crutch, rather than planning it out as a fully fledged open world game. And this game came out in 2014, so the open world hype was still going high at this point. Hell, it's been a thing since before Inquisition, and it's still affecting games today. But the thing that people need to understand is that going open world doesn't automatically mean your game will be a 10 out of 10. Yeah, it can be good to have a big world to let your players loose on, but you also have to make sure that there's enough depth to justify the size of your world, because if you don't, it just ends up being a big empty world with nothing to do. Or in this case, a lot to do, but no substance to it. And this is where most of the problems came in. So let's go ahead and talk about the open world. On first glance, the open world does look nice, mainly due to it being on the Frostbite engine, and the landscapes look impressive because of it. Even though the engine has been outshined these days, it can't be understated that the environments look stunning, especially coming from the previous game. Origins was still stuck in the era of piss filters, and Dragon Age 2 wasn't as bad, but it was still lingering behind. But being able to actually see colors is magical for this series, as it finally feels like the series was making its way at the time to the new console generation. But the more you look into this game, the more you start to see the cracks. To start off, the art design is lacking. The armor, interior, monsters, so many designs in this game look like shit. The armor design looks like shit. They look like they were just procedurally generated. They have no personality or creativity to it. The good ones are recreations from previous games, like Hawk and Cassandra's look. But then look at the armored jacket. It looks like a coat that was spray painted silver. A lot of the DLC armor that you get at the beginning of the game, all the proportions just look odd and it doesn't fit the previous aesthetic of the games prior. Just compare these 2 armor sets and tell me which one you prefer. They also got lazy with the NPCs. Now, I know I complained before about the same Alistair haircut in Origins, but I'd rather have that than all of them wearing this. What the fuck is this even supposed to be? Is there a sale going on for green ragged hoodies? I'm not asking for much here, just a little bit of diversity when it comes to the NPCs to make the world feel a little bit more believable. But moving on, the game is divided into several different sections that act out as wide open worlds to explore, each one having different materials to collect, quests to achieve, and enemies to fight. If you have played any Assassin's Creed game, this will look very familiar, because a lot of what you're doing in this game is repeating markers on the map that appear in the different regions. Whether it's setting up camps, completing side quests, collecting materials, or exploring caves, the scenarios remain mostly the same across the different regions. Now, there are 2 different ways to make an open world game. You can either make one big map, or multiple medium-sized maps. Inquisition goes for the latter, which is not inherently a bad idea, but it dampens the enjoyment of the game because it gets incredibly tedious and overall boring because you get a new region after hours of grinding in the hinterlands, finding materials and helping people in the towns, only to get a new region and do the exact same thing you've been doing. Now, the atmosphere of this game is not terrible by any means. The regions have good variety and do stand out from each other, even if they are just going through the cliche of being snowy, forest, jungle, and desert biomes. But even the architecture of the dungeons can get really mesmerizing. There was this one time I went into this building that had a rift in it, and all the monsters and soldiers were frozen Inception style. It looked really unnerving, but also really cool at the same time. And then after looking around, I activated a beacon and they all started moving again, which added good tension. However, it's hard to find the good moments in this game, because traveling in the open world is a fucking nightmare. Like many other open world games, the most devastating villain you will come across is a fucking incline. I am sick of all these open world games with inclines that cause my character to slip on their ass like a fucking drunk and go tumbling down the hill. Take a note from Nintendo and give me an option to climb the goddamn thing. And I know what you're going to say.
Oh, just check the map and follow the path, stupid.
Brother, what fucking path? This map does not fucking help at all. And navigating this place is so annoying because you will follow paths that will lead you to dead ends, impossible inclines, areas that you need a quest to activate, or in the worst case, high-level enemies that will just one-shot you. What the fuck am I playing, Xenoblade? The most annoying thing about this game is how the open world is with level scaling. In other games, they will usually give you a measurement on an area you're going into to tell you if you're the proper level or not. This way, it gives you an idea on whether or not you want to take the challenge, or save it and come back later to have less of a hassle. But this game's too fucking cool for that, because you get into a new region and you get some new quests done? Oh, well you better check your fucking color shirt you're wearing, because these motherfuckers are gonna run up and break your goddamn kneecaps! There is no fucking indication on what level you should be when doing quests or exploring a new area. So you end up going into story areas, getting your ass kicked because you didn't grind enough. So you go back to the hinterlands and do monotonous quests and fighting over and over and over again, just so you can get a high enough level to actually achieve something. This is by far the most frustrating worlds I have ever explored, because it's straight up just not fun to run around in. Now, it's not all bad. In fact, here's a positive I can list off. The music is really good, and ironically enough, it's my favorite in the trilogy. The songs have a really whimsical and dramatic tone that really build on the dire mood that this game takes place in. But it really encourages the exploration of the game. The triumphant beats sell the high moments. The more dour songs build tension. And my personal favorite track, Theodos Romance, has such a tender but somber mood that really entraps the mind and sells the romantic mood of the song. there's one thing. I wish I actually fucking heard the music more often. I don't know if this was a glitch or something, but every time a song would start while running around the open world, it would stop. And I would just have to suffer in silence. The only thing I had to listen to was this. Or this. Yes, Origins and Dragon Age 2 followed the trend of other RPGs and had the same song going over and over again whenever you got into combat, but at least you had something to listen to. It also doesn't help that the banter rarely plays in this game. One of the best parts about the other games was listening to the characters interact and talk to each other. It really sold the companions as actual people in the game. Now, when it does happen, it is nice, but it feels so rare. Like characters only talk to each other every once in a while. And hell, I'm not alone in feeling that way. Look, there's literally a mod that increases the party banter. And I gotta ask, what the fuck happened? Was the Frostbite engine so alienating that they couldn't figure out how to make these sequences work or some shit? I don't get it. Also, the mounts are shit. Which honestly is not surprising at all, because horses in almost every open world game suck. Even in good games, developers will always struggle to make horse mounts an engaging traversal experience. The only game that had a decent one was Elden Ring. And even that's a stretch. But the mounts in Inquisition are especially bad. First of all, they take like 9 years to turn, and they cut out any possibility of hearing more party banter. So fuck me, I guess. Also, are we just not going to talk about this? Because I thought for sure blood magic was illegal. So yeah, the open world and atmosphere is not great. But it's only the beginning. The combat took a hell of a blow as well. The combat in this game is all over the place. The mechanics are more or less taken from previous games in the series, but given a massive overhaul. The class systems in Origins is more of a loose bag, as the skills and abilities just get added to your character as you level up. It was a very simple system where you just had a list of spells and abilities that kept on adding, while having specializations that give you benefits. It was basically a beta test for what the skill trees in Dragon Age 2 would be. In 2, you had multiple skill trees that would come in active and passive abilities. Inquisition keeps the skill trees that were in Dragon Age 2. However, the thing that took a massive turn is how the combat works as a whole. And boy, is it a doozy. So Dragon Age 2 got a lot of criticism for the combat being janky. Now granted, it was warranted, especially the extreme difficulty spike and wave-based enemies. It also got a lot of criticism for moving away from the tactical combat of Origins because they wanted to speed things along. So in Origins, they decided to slow it down by making it 20% speed. The animations in this game move at a snail's pace. So you guys might notice that throughout each of these games, I have tried to diversify what class I play. So in Origins, I played a mage. In 2, I played a rogue. In Inquisition, I played a warrior. Playing as a warrior early on in Inquisition was so fucking annoying, because the animations of the attacks and the abilities take so long to do, and there's barely any leeway on what you can do. This game doesn't feel as tactical as Origins, or as aggressive in 2. It feels like I'm playing a lesser version of Diablo. It doesn't help that the enemy placement in this game is a nightmare. This is mainly due to the game's open world, and because of it, they need to populate the map with plenty of enemies to fight, whether they're soldiers, mages, animals, monsters, darkspawn, or friggin' dragons. Now granted, I do prefer this enemy placement compared to the wave-based fighting that was in Dragon Age 2, and the combat does get more interesting once you get to high levels, as the abilities become more varied and the skills get more creative. However, there are so many aspects to this game that bog down the pacing to the point where it gets incredibly boring, especially when you have to deal with a large map that is very heavy on just tallying off objectives. And anytime you get into combat, your character moves slower, and has to either crawl their way far enough to be considered not in combat or just fight another batch of dickheads that you accidentally wander too close to. This to me ruins the pacing of the game because there's a lot to do and it feels like I'm constantly being interrupted with combat, and unlike other open world games, combat is the least compelling thing to do. Origins was a great game, but I don't think anyone is praising it for its combat. But it was fine because it had more to it than the combat to be a great game. And going back to what I mentioned before, about the pace getting bogged down, that seems to be a running theme in this game, because there's a lot of aspects that really slow down the pacing of this game. So let's talk about the war room. So one of the main aspects of this game is going into the war room and consulting with the other members of the Inquisition on what to pour resources to, and the next steps going forward for the Inquisition. You can use this to gather materials, unlock new companions, and even start main quests. It's very Total War-ish, and each time you pick a mission, you assign one of the 3 members to complete the task. And I can see what they're trying to do. They want to promote this feeling to the player that they are in command of a larger order, and they have the power to dispatch their forces across Ferelden and Orlais, and they can do this while traveling and getting their own tasks done. But these tasks have almost no depth to them. Whenever you activate them, it just starts a timer, and when it's complete, you get a little mission report, and then you take the reward. It's basically like playing a Clash of Clans ripoff. It also doesn't help that some of the companion quests require them too, so when you have to find a quest, you need to go to the war room, and you just need to click around to search for the one you're looking for, because the game barely does anything to distinguish them from each other. Something else you will notice is that there are places in the open world that would be blocked off to you, and they require you to go back to the war room, spend power to open up a zone, and then you can come back and venture forth. And I hate this. One of my least favorite things in any game, especially open world ones, is limiting a player from areas on a map because it pigeonholes them, and makes the world feel less alive because of it. And it's an even bigger issue in this game because, once again, it bogs down the pace of it. There are so many things in this game that feel like they only exist to extend the playtime. It is a deadly case of quantity over quality. If I want to do a story mission, I will do a story mission. If I want to explore the world, I will explore the world. Stop forcing me to do this shit. It's one thing to put a high-level enemy in an area that a player wants to explore, because at the very least that incentivizes them to level up so that they can defeat that enemy and defeat this obstacle. It's another thing to tell them to grind out just to get some arbitrary game point so that they can just clear the way and venture forth. It just feels so artificial. And speaking of which, let's talk about what is probably my least favorite aspect of this game: the power system. So, unlike the previous games, you can't just go right into the main story right out of the gate. For a majority of them, you're required to have a certain amount of power. How do you get power, you may ask? Mainly from doing the open world shit. Doing rifts, side quests, collecting material to craft, and so on and so forth. The thing is, the required amount of power is constantly increasing every time you progress the story, so the further you go, the more you have to grind. Some of these missions will give you very little power, and so many of them give no gratification whatsoever. They're literally just fetch quests or kill these things quests, and they repeat over and over again until you get the right amount of power, and then you can move on to the main quests that actually have a little bit of enjoyment in them. Remember Origins, how almost all the side quests in that game related to the main quest? This was a great method because the players were able to complete side content without taking the focus off the main objective. And I think that is wonderful. Seeing the design for this game makes me incredibly confused as to why BioWare lost so much faith in their own game design. But we'll get to that later. Right now, we should move on. Dragon Age Origins was a story about unity against an overwhelming force. The goal was about uniting the people of Ferelden to stop the Blight, regardless if they were a human, an elf, or a dwarf. Dragon Age 2 is a story about how one person who repeatedly gets beaten to the ground and loses everything grows to be the legendary champion of Kirkwall. Dragon Age Inquisition is a story of religion, and how you, the Inquisitor, gained power to close the breach. As mentioned before, this game's story starts after the explosion, where your character resides with a mysterious power branded on their hand. You quickly discover that this power allows you to stop the breaches where demons are leaking out, but there's other problems than just demons. Since the meeting never took place, mages and Templars continue to fight, and feuds between the factions all over Thetis have been breaking out. So there is only one option. The Inquisition must be reinstated, and it's up to them to bring peace to the lands. God, this is dumb. Alright, I exaggerate. The main premise of this game is not terrible by any means, but to get right to the chase, it's pretty standard, even more so than Origins is. People have said it before, and I'll say it again, the Inquisition doesn't feel much like an Inquisition, at least not what the history would have us believe. In this game, the Inquisition is just a league of good guys that work as a base of operations for our protagonists and their posse. It's very clear that they wanted to make a new faction without forcing the player to pick sides between the other factions. Which is fair enough, it's not like this has to be a Fire Emblem game or anything like that. But to get into the story, after the opening and the grinding in the hinterlands, you set off to find the Templars, or the mages, depending on what you choose. And the Templars are having their own issues with demons and are being possessed, which is really ironic. At this point you don't know why, but after stopping the threat and meeting a magic lad that definitely isn't a demon, you now have the choice to recruit the Templars or the mages onto your side. Now you're probably wondering, what about the whole plot between the mages and Templars? And yeah, I was wondering that too. Then I realized that they just completely threw that storyline in the fucking trash. Remember the growing tensions that Templars and mages have, even in the first game? Remember how Anders did a whole terrorist act to send a message to both the Templars and the mages? Remember all the war crimes that the two leaders of each faction did in the previous game, just to get back at each other? Cause this game doesn't. Because other than a few enemies you fight, a couple open world exchanges, and some party banter, they barely fucking address it. Never mind the fact that this was the whole storyline that was set up in the main driving force in Dragon Age 2. Nope, we gotta get back to the Demon Portal leak. So after we recruit some people into the Inquisition, we go back to Haven and see if we have enough Mighty Putty to seal up this crack. And it turns out we do. Thanks, Billy Mays, rest in peace. So we go back and celebrate, but not for long, because then a bunch of assholes come by and attack us and storm the base. And this is where we meet the main villain of the game, Corypheus. And he looks fucking awful. His design looks like shit. He looks like a joke character someone would make in Street Fighter 6. But he explains why the protagonist has their new power to seal the breaches, which I actually think is really interesting. Basically, this power was never meant to be something that could seal the breaches, and it was never meant to be given to the main character. It was a power that Corypheus was going to use when they were torturing the Divine. But your character showed up at just the right moment and the Divine gave them the power, as one last fuck you to Corypheus. And I like this. It loops back to the whole idea that this can be anyone's story, regardless of what race and gender they chose at the beginning. It gives a good Spider-Man vibe to it. Speaking of superheroes, that is the overall vibe that this game is going for, and you can really see it in this scene. This is the scene where the big bad reveals himself to the character and the audience, and explains their plans and taunts everyone around him. Now, while I do like the concept of the power being a mistake, and the game reinstating the idea of the main character being a self-insert, Corypheus makes this shit really messy, and I can't help but feel like the game didn't need him to push the narrative. The whole idea of the lands of Thetis being divided and forming a single flag to recruit allies and rally the people behind is already gripping enough. For Christ's sake, the previous game set up a conflict that divided the world. We don't need this big bad to fight against. He just feels so unnecessary. So after this, Haven, the main hub at this point, gets sieged and the entire Inquisition is forced to retreat. And this is a clear low point in the story. At least that's what I was going to say, but then everyone starts to sing to lift the spirits up and not give up. And it's clear that this game really is setting the tone for the Hollywood method of storytelling. Because we just had the main villain ravage an entire base of operations for the Inquisition and probably murder a bunch of people in it. And everyone is just singing and having a good time. Don't worry guys, we'll get through this. Remember in Origins, when the Darkspawn killed Duncan, King Kalen, and the other Grey Wardens, and you and Alistair barely make it out alive? Remember how that is treated as a low moment for the characters? Well, the reason why is that Origins treats this setting as a dark fantasy, whereas in Inquisition, the setting is presented as more of a high fantasy. At least, that's how I see it. The tone and concept of previous games feels like they were thrown away, which is a problem because it alienates the series away from its roots. So after this little song and dance, you find a new base called Skyhold, and from then on, it becomes your new base of operations. And I fucking hate this place. I understand what they're going for. They wanted to make a customizable base of operations, but they didn't have to make this shit so fucking annoying to navigate. One of the main aspects of this game is talking to your companions, and it doesn't help that getting to them is such a chore. I'd prefer Haven to this place. It was at least straightforward and easy to navigate. It's also at this point that Varric introduces us to Hawke, which I have very mixed feelings about that. On one hand, it's cool to see the previous protagonists come back, and I can talk to them about stuff that happened before. But on the other hand, this feels like it's purely for fan service. And honestly, that's what I feel for a lot of the returning characters. But anyway, Hawke gives us some advice on how to stop Corypheus, and that they have a Grey Warden contact that they are working with. So you go and meet them, and you meet some guy named Stroud. At least that's who I met. So this is where you can meet another returning character from the previous games. If Alistair remained a Grey Warden, it'll be him. If you turned Loghain to a Grey Warden, it will be him. If none of them are still Grey Wardens, then it's Stroud. But regardless of who it is, they will tell you that the Grey Wardens are sick and are doing bad things. So after a little bit of grinding, you do a siege battle on the Warden stronghold, which is actually pretty cool. Really makes me want to play Shadow of War. But you fight off a bunch of demons, and then you see that one of the main Grey Warden dickheads has been corrupted by Corypheus. But thankfully, my character can tell the other Wardens to wake the fuck up, samurai, and they all revolt against him. But then suddenly my party, Hawke and Shroud, are dragged into the Fade. So the main thing to take note of story-wise is that this gives a little bit more of a clear picture on what happened between the protagonist and Corypheus, and it actually shows us a clear scene of them receiving the power, which feels kind of unnecessary. We were already told that they were given the power as a mistake. I don't think they really need to see that again. I mean, I guess it's mainly to give context between the Divine and why she did what she did, but I don't know. It feels a little too much. But finally, we find an exit to the Fade, but a big monster is in the way, and you have to choose between Hawke and Shroud to stay behind and fight it off. I wonder who I'm gonna save. The person I played as in the previous game and have more of a connection to, or some random schmuck I just met. And before you say it, yeah, I know it would have been a hard decision if it was Alistair, but this decision is still incredibly hollow because it's not like whoever you pick becomes a new companion or joins you throughout the game or anything like that. They just fuck off out of the story. It really just comes down to which character you like better. But it's also at this point where you have the choice to have the Grey Wardens join the Inquisition, and because of my understanding of things, we need people on our side. So, I have them join us. And then my companions complain to me about it. Okay, I get why some of you fuckers don't like this, but why does Cassandra have an issue with this? Baby, I love you, but you roped me into this Inquisitor shit. And now you want to tell me that I'm doing it wrong? But I also want to take a break from the story for a sec and talk about the RPG mechanics, and where they really start to go downhill in this game. The choices in this game, compared to the last ones, feel so arbitrary and hollow to the point where they are ultimately meaningless, even more so than Dragon Age 2. The only real thing you have in terms of consequence is what your companions think of you. And this system has been clunky ever since Origins. The story and quests in Inquisition are basic to a fault. And I know some of you might say, well, Origins was a basic story too, and people liked it. And yes, you're right. But while Origins was standard in story, it made up for with in-depth characters and RPG mechanics that gave you a variety and replayability. Inquisition, well, I wouldn't say there isn't replayability, as there are different ways to interact with the other characters, especially since this game takes account the other game's choices. but the open world and combat make it such a chore to do. But besides that, I do think that this game does do a good job at incorporating the fates of characters in the previous games as well, as it is cool to see them again and talk to them about what I did before. But that's the problem. I'm ultimately not interested in what is new in this game, as all my interests are going into the people that I already know. I'm more invested in Morrigan and what she's doing with her son who has the soul of an old god, rather than fucking Sarah and her stupid red Jenny thieves. For all the effort that this game puts into trying to make me feel like I'm the one in charge, I'm not. I mean, yeah, they gave me the name Inquisitor, provided me my own private quarters, I have my own Iron Throne where I can decide the fate of prisoners, and everyone is singing my praises and talking about what a great guy I am. But I'm not doing it. These three are. As far as I'm aware, these three are the ones that are doing all the important shit. Cullen is marching troops and conquering land, Liliana is sending spies and doing cool espionage shit, and Josephine is setting up meetings and negotiating for trades. And what do? The leader of the Inquisition? I run around like a jackass picking flowers and do busy work for these fuckers. As a protagonist, the Inquisitor doesn't give a feeling of authority. The Grey Warden had authority in Origins, hell, Hawk had authority in 2. I don't feel like I'm in charge in this game. I feel like a pawn, because I essentially am. And I can't help but feel like there was a missed opportunity here. These three characters hold the basis for a really cool concept between the three character types you could have played as in this game. Much like how Dragon Age 2 had the 3 personality types, imagine if you had the option for 3 leader types. Hypothetically speaking, imagine the personality types being a conqueror, a negotiator, and a spy. And each quest that involved you making a new ally for the Inquisition had you choosing between one of these 3. Say there's a high-class noble that has a lot of money that can fund for supplies for the Inquisition, and you have to convince him to support the Inquisition. One option could be to just march in Teddy Roosevelt style, come in with all your soldiers and all your guards and intimidate him into giving you money. Another could be setting up a meeting and offering a trade deal. This could be good because it can establish relations, but at the expense of one of your other resources. Or you can try digging up information and get some dark secrets on the guy and blackmail him into doing your bidding. And you can still have these characters in the game if you want. Have them serve as mentor figures to the Inquisitor. They teach you their ways and you can get a closer bond to them to improve each method. And depending on which one you use more, the more closer the bond you get to the mentor figure. But nope, they just do their own thing, and I go on collecting fucking rocks. But back to the story. Next up is a ballroom blitz type of story, where you attend a fancy ball with the intent to get the one-up on the enemy who is trying to assassinate a higher-up. It starts off interesting enough, serving as more of an espionage-focused mission, and you also meet Morrigan here, which I gotta say, Claudia Black is giving a really good performance. She has that same smooth voice she's always had, but she sounds much wiser and more compassionate.
You have been very busy this evening, hunting in every dark corner of the palace. Perhaps you and I hunt the same prey.
But unfortunately, that's where the good parts end, because even when we're doing a main quest, we're still cursed with having to do boring side objectives. Later on, you find out that the person that's trying to assassinate the royalty lady was corrupted by Oh my fucking god! So this is something that is really annoying in this game. Every goddamn main quest in this game revolves around Corypheus. And it gets really fucking irritating because the main motivation behind each and every sub-villain in this game is Corypheus told me to do it. What are you guys seeing in this man? Please tell me, I want to know. This shit is so fucking trivial and has no nuance to it. I'd rather take the fucking Kunari being assholes in Dragon Age 2. So you stop the assassin and make another choice that really doesn't make any difference. Alright, moving on. So the next mission is actually pretty good. It's a whole adventure you have with Morrigan. And I mentioned that she is one of the better parts in here because seeing her again after the other games is really cool. You can also see her son at Skyhold, and there are a bunch of different dialogue options depending on what you chose in Origins.
That's him. Oh, wow. I thought he'd look, I don't know, more demonic. Tentacles and fiery breath.
He is a normal boy, Alistair.
And what does he know of how he was made?
He knows his father was a good man. I thought you deserved that much.
So that's his little boy?
His name is Kieran.
Have they ever met?
We lived together for a time, somewhere safe, far from this world.
This world? How many worlds are there?
We needed only the one. We were happy there.
Until you left him.
I was not the one who left.
Also, something that I found out is that Kieran is voiced by Claudia Black's son, which is pretty cool, not gonna lie. So before this quest, Morgan shows you the portals that travel between worlds, like the one she took in the Witch Hunt DLC. And she tells you that you can use this to help the Inquisition, and that there is a way that she can transform into a dragon to help you kill Corypheus. So you set up a quest to track down Corypheus again, but this time it actually has him in it. And it leads to an ancient elven ruin with their old gods. And the lore that you learn here is actually really cool, and it builds on this game's history. I'm not going to go too deep into detail because I'll be here forever, but this quest is one of the better ones, even if it remains in repetitive gameplay loop. But it's not exactly done after this. So after returning to Skyhold, you find that Morgan is in the portal looking for Kieran, and the two of you find him with Flemeth, and she's as cryptic as ever, but you find out that Flemeth is actually an elven spirit called Mythal, and she has taken the appearance of a witch for centuries. Huh. I wonder what my elf companion Solus would think about this. But with that, everything is finally set up and you can finally have the showdown with this ugly ketchup-stained motherfucker. And it's really fucking clunky. I mean, I didn't expect much with this combat, but I gotta say, the game really disappoints with the spectacle of this fight. Morgan turning into a dragon is cool, but it doesn't feel like the entirety of the Inquisition is all in on this fight. Something that I loved about the final battle in Origins is that they made an effort to show everyone involved for the Blight, in both cutscenes and in the gameplay. In this, it's just me and the schmucks that I happen to take with me. So you'll hold R, and then the big bad is finally dead, and everyone sings your praises back home. Oh, and Solus leaves. Kinda weird. I wonder what he's up to.
You should not have given your orb to Corypheus, Red Wolf.
I was too weak to unlock it after my slumber. The failure was mine. I should pay the price. But the people, they need me. I am so sorry.
I am sorry as well, old friend.
Oh. Shit. So, yeah. It's a lot to talk about. They set up Solus as a new antagonist, and in the Trespassers DLC, they do an even better job with setting him up. But before we get to that, let's talk about the companions. The companions in this game are marginally better than the ones in 2, I would say. They aren't perfect, but I remember all of their names, so that's better than nothing. Varric makes a return, and that's a good thing, because he's a great character. Overall, he's still Varric, but he acts more of a mentor to the Inquisitor, whereas in 2, he feels like Hawke's best bud. Cassandra becomes a companion in the game, continuing the trend of NPCs in previous games becoming party members in the sequels. We got some pretty good depth with her character, and it's nice to break the shell of this stern and serious woman. Her romance is cute, and I like her character moments. There's Dorian, who's your sassy gay best friend, Sarah, who's your quirky lesbian best friend, Vivian, who has the best fashion sense in this game. Cole, my personal favorite, is a strange entity that is not exactly human or ghost. He acts so strange and is capable of reading people's thoughts. He is one of the more unique characters in this series, and it's a welcome addition. There's Blackwall, who's just kinda here. And then there's Iron Bull. Okay, I don't like Bull, but not for the reason that you think. I think Bull's character and personality is fine, but I don't like it because it doesn't feel like it fits with a Kunari. It feels like it would fit a lot better for a dwarf, because Bull doesn't act like a Kunari I'm used to. And then we get to Solus. So something that I've been told countless times even before playing this game is how well written of a character Solus is. Everywhere you look, people will talk about how great of a character Solus is in this series. He's one of the most well written and in-depth characters. Starting off, he really doesn't seem all that special. He has an interest in the Fade and has a fascination with spirits and ancient artifacts. He reminds me of Shrike in Berserk, someone who is always willing to explain the ethereal world, ancient stories of old elves, and the existence of spirits and demons. And this gets flopped on its head at the end of the game, where he leaves the Inquisition and takes his place as the Dreadwolf, revealing to be an old elven god similar to that of Loki. In the Trespasser DLC, we find out that he is not a natural elf. He was the one responsible for the destruction of his ancient species of elves, and he has found out that he is capable of restoring their world in the Fade and he can bring them back. But to do this, he needs to destroy the world and recreate the one that he knows before, killing all life just to bring back his people. He tells you everything, and he takes no joy in it, which makes him a really compelling antagonist. I am happy to see that what people said about Solus wasn't blown out of proportion. He really is a strong driving force for this series going forward. Even though there's so much about this game that I despise, the ending sets up a sequel with so much potential that I am excited to see what they do further to expand upon it. But I don't think that makes the rest of this game worth it. I can play Origins multiple times and still have varied playthroughs in it. Dragon Age 2 is a mess, but there is still a value to it with what they were able to salvage. Now, Inquisition does have its moments, and the moments elevate themselves so high. Hell, I wouldn't even say that Inquisition is necessarily a bad game. It's a boring game. And to me, that's worse. Even a bad game can be entertaining. If not for the right reasons, then for the wrong ones. But a boring game can't even be enjoyed for that reason, and the good moments can only take it so far. I believe this stems from BioWare losing their faith in their own methods. It's clear that they just copied from other developers for what they wanted to do for this game, that they lost sight for what made their original game so beloved. They're so fixated on trying to grab the attention of new players that they are losing the players that they already have. I was actually reminded a lot of Mass Effect Andromeda when playing this game. These games have a lot of similarities. The open world, the exploration, the side quests, the Frostbite engine, it was clearly made in this weird open world Frostbite engine era of BioWare. But while Andromeda lacked that sense of wonder and excitement from the original Mass Effect trilogy, the combat was fun. Even today the combat is fun, and I can at the very least enjoy that when playing this game. And Inquisition doesn't have that. But what sucks is the constant infighting for what the creators want this game to be, because this game will throw cameo after cameo while simultaneously introducing new characters through the eyes of a new protagonist, so it leaves new players confused as to who these people from before are supposed to be, and old players frustrated at the lack of continuity between each game. And that continues to be the destruction of the company going forward. So that's it. We are finally finished with everything Dragon Age, right? Well, no. Not exactly. There's one more thing we have to look at. But thankfully, it's pretty short, so we'll make this quick. Adapting material based on video games has been proven to be a very effective method for many companies. It can be a way to show years of build-up for a game's universe, passion for the world and source material, and breathe new life into the IP. Shows like Arcane, Castlevania, Cyberpunk Edge Runners have proven that these worlds can be explored in many different ways. So making a show based in the Dragon Age universe is a good idea. So did it pay off? No. This show it's whatever. For a 6-episode show, there's definitely worse out there, but I just could not find myself to care about any of these characters. They are some of the most obnoxious motherfuckers I've ever met, and it doesn't help that it feels like they use tropes from other shows that do it way better. The overly grumpy main character that doesn't care about anyone or their feelings. The lesbian couple we're supposed to care about. The cute, quirky, and silly character that acts as the comic relief. But it fails so hard, and the other shows do it so much better. You'll never be him, you'll never be them, and you'll never be her. The thing about Absolution is that it doesn't stand out compared to the other shows. It's not like Arcane, where the art style and animation stands out, or Edge Runners, where the story is incredibly tear-jerking and rich with recognizable locations from the game. But this show also doesn't get much people interested in the series. Castlevania got people to talk about the classic games, Arcane got people into the lore of League, and Edge Runners got Cyberpunk player numbers to an all-time high. Inquisition didn't go up when this shit got released. Also, I want to talk about Quindian. And more importantly, I want to talk about how the Kunari are treated in this series. I fucking hate how the Kunari were treated in this series. They did them so dirty. We go from having a really cool window into how the Kunari are with Sten, then we go to a bunch of murdering assholes in Dragon Age 2, and now they're just a bunch of quirky himbos and bimbos. There was no consistency when it came to writing them, and it makes me so upset. The only part that stays consistent with the Kunari is that they're buff and they like to fight. Hell, their fucking visual design doesn't even stay consistent. They literally just turned them into fucking D&D tieflings. But in the end, this show ultimately fails in what it wanted to do. It's not the worst show in the world, but it's pretty forgettable. Which isn't the first time for BioWare. So, what can really be said now? And what can BioWare do going forward? We have a basis for what they're doing. They are pooling all their efforts and resources into two singular projects to grab the attentions of both of their fan bases. But what will be done for this series, and what needs to be done? Well, personally, this series is an odd case, as it's too late for it to go down the Fallout and Elder Scrolls tactic of moving away from the last game's story and starting anew. They locked in that decision when they made Dragon Age 2. If the trailers are anything to go by, it looks like they're doing what they did before. They're going to have a new protagonist in a new region fighting a character that we knew in a previous game. And honestly, I don't think that's an option at this point because Inquisition set up so much that I believe putting us in the shoes of a new protagonist is just going to be alienating. Because once again, we have to be reintroduced into this world and the old characters and get the new characters up to speed. It's gotten old, and BioWare has done this so many times, and I don't think that's what the fans want anymore. The community has grown attached to the characters in their respective games, and they are unable to interact with them the same way when making a new character. Honestly, I think the next game would do best if we just played as someone that we already know, since the main antagonist is someone that we have history with. Going back to play as the Inquisitor, or Hawk, or hell, even the hero Ferelden would give good continuity for this series and give the returning fanbase so much needed hype to bring them back to play. But unfortunately, they're not only straying away from that in a story sense, but also in the gameplay sense. For those unaware, some footage and information was leaked showing that Dreadwolf is striving to have gameplay similar to the modern God of War games. And to me, this shows that BioWare, for whatever reason, is still so stubborn to return to their roots. They have fallen so far from their position that they're constantly looking at other companies for ideas, when really, they should be looking at themselves. They need to look back at these classic titles that have won countless of praise and look to recreate them. Doom did it, Capcom did it, Nintendo did it twice. And I understand that with the publisher issue, that possibility is not really in the cards right now. which is a shame, because I think this is a really cool world that BioWare has made. And as much as I want to be hopeful for the future and believe that they will deliver a game with the same amount of quality and passion as Origins, another part of me expects to find another checklist-styled open-world game that continues to get farther from the roots it originated from. So, this one was a doozy. To be honest, the main reason this video took so long was just convincing myself to play this game rather than do anything else. It also got way longer than I anticipated. Despite being my least favorite in the trilogy, I have the most to say about it. But I'm happy to finally put this series to rest. Despite everything, it's been a good time. To those of you who stuck around to the end, thank you. The next long-term video won't be on a particular game, but rather a topic. But some smaller projects will be coming in the near future, so stay tuned.